Tonight's program is a joint effort with One Detroit and the media outlets in the Detroit Journalism Cooperative. And all of this year, the DJC is examining whether Detroiters are better off today than during the 1967 Detroit Rebellion. And while looking at the current state of education, we found that school suspensions and expulsions have risen dramatically, especially for African American students. Take a look.
14-year-old Keyshawn Winfield has been playing football since he was 5.
He plays 4 different positions in football, and he loves it, and he's good with his teammates, and they have a good rapport. He has a good rapport with his coaches.
On the field, Keyshawn excels. In school, it's a different story.
So Mom had, about 10 meetings last school year?
Yes.
Danielle Flint is a child advocate working with Keyshawn and his mother, Alakia Sewell.
And there are so many events, incident 1, incident 2, incident 3, 4, 5, 6.
Suspensions lasting 2 days, 3 days, 5, 10. So many suspensions, he missed 60 days of school altogether. Now Keyshawn has to repeat 7th grade. Diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, he's got a trail of suspensions that started in the 2nd grade.
He will be really combative for certain things. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to see your child go through this and you can't help him.
Alakia says the loss of a close family member caused Keyshawn's problems early on. Support comes from Danielle, who works with the Student Advocacy Center of Michigan in Ypsilanti. Recent data reveals more than 100 pre-K children, kids younger than the age of 5, have been suspended from Michigan schools in just 1 year.
For the first time, I had an expulsion case with a 1st grader, and here's this little kid, he kind of had a speech impediment, and trying to help him, someone had said, "I'm going to kill you" on the playground, and so he was scared, and so he had brought a knife to school. He never had any intent to use it. He actually wasn't expelled, by the way.
Rules, generally speaking, are rules. Weapons, drugs, and fighting carry mandatory penalties. It's zero tolerance, dating back to the 90s, when nationwide we got tougher on crime in the streets and weapons in our schools.
The problem is that over time, zero tolerance laws have been expanded in Michigan and other states to include things other than weapons and that have room for subjective enforcement.
More zero-tolerance rules meant more suspensions for other offenses, like insubordination and disrespect. When the ACLU crunched the numbers, they found more African Americans were getting suspended compared to whites.
In some of these school districts, African American kids are 3, 4, 5 times as likely to be suspended and expelled, and there's no evidence that they're actually engaging in more misbehavior.
Experts say the suspensions come in part because of a clash of cultures, where often white teachers are less able to connect with black students.
And this is all complicated by lots of other things, right? So we have cutbacks in school funding that mean that kids are having less recess, less physical education. There are schools in Detroit that have no gym and no playground. So what are those kids doing? Their recess time is walking around the school inside.
It's shown with just 1 suspension, a student is more likely to become a dropout.
Where once behavior would be considered naughty or something that needed to be corrected, now those behaviors are seen as criminal and something to be punished. When people talk about the school-to-prison pipeline, that pipeline is really built on the fact that we've criminalized so many behaviors that used to be thought of as naughty.
In Lansing, bills are in the works intended to loosen the zero-tolerance rules. But that's only a start. In the classroom, more commitment is needed to work with individual students to avoid more suspensions.
I've spoken with teachers who have said, but if the kid is misbehaving, I have to punish him. And I say, why? What if you spent an extra 15 minutes building a relationship with that child, or you spent some time trying to figure out why he or she is having such a hard time?
In Keyshawn's case, his mother and his advocate still have high hopes for the new school year.
Research shows that students are much more likely to graduate and be successful academically if they have even one person who is going to continue to work with them through their journey, to not give up on them.
Danielle says if he can build some better relationships with a couple of teachers, maybe he just might stay in school and buck the trend of becoming just another statistic.
Wow, that really raises a lot of interesting discussion points about the relationships that our students have with their teachers, the relationships the students have with their parents at home, and how important it is that all of those things are linked together. And joining me now to talk about that are Ivy Bailey, the interim president of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, and Sharlonda Buckman. She is the CEO of the Detroit Parent Network. And ladies, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I think it's a really interesting discussion. Obviously, you represent a large segment of Detroit teachers and Detroit parents, but I really believe this is a conversation that parents and teachers around the state of Michigan can have, and you're representative of. So let me start with you and taking a look at the school year. Ivy, I want to start with you. Talk to me a little bit about how teachers are feeling right now in the new Detroit Public Schools District and what they're kind of sensing so far.
I think the teachers are hopeful with us. I think for us, sometimes we think of it as a same day, different name. But there is a sense of hope now with the teachers in Detroit Public Schools. We're hoping to see some changes. You can't change the school system's name and continue to do things as you've done before. You know, it can't be business as usual. Something has to change. I do know there are some new programs, and the teachers who are participating in those programs are very excited. There's a Montessori program, there's an Arabic language program, and so they're excited about those changes, but we're expecting to see a lot more.
Sharlonda, what are parents talking about when they're talking about the beginning of this school year here in the city?
Well, beyond getting about it, beyond the shock that we're actually back into the school year, most of us have just been in a little bit of shock, but somewhat anxious. I think definitely wanting a much better school year than we had last year. It was very turbulent, probably one of the most turbulent school years that we've actually seen. You know, with less teacher sick outs and student sick outs, but also with teachers in the classroom who are qualified in those subjects to teach with the tools they need to teach their children. I think parents are, you know, really frustrated because there's still issues that aren't different than what we learned earlier this year when we surveyed hundreds of parents across the city, and that is they're concerned about safety inside the building, outside the building. They're concerned about transition, lots of transition in the principal ranks, but especially in the teacher ranks. And we have to all do our part to create a stable situation for our kids. And so I think anxious to see what this school year is going to bring. It's not fair for a kid to have a different teacher in their subjects every other month.
And how would you address that, Ivy? Is that happening inside the classrooms?
I think this year the union has pushed, and Mrs. Merriweather has agreed to us do leveling earlier this year, because you know, you hate to be a teacher, you know, and I'm speaking from a teacher's point of view, you hate to sit in front of a group of children and then 2 months later, you're moved from those children. You've created relationships, and those kids expect you to be there. So the whole leveling process, we have schools that have a low number of students with enrollment, and then we have other schools who are over class size. So we plan on doing that earlier this year, than, you know, sooner than later.
So would you say the continuity in the classroom is so important to a child's success?
Oh, definitely, definitely. We actually have some parents who moved their child with a teacher. I mean, that's how great the relationship is between a teacher and their student.
Absolutely, and the relationship is critically important. One of the things that I do want to lift up that I think is a promising practice that's continuing to happen is a parent-teacher home visitation program. It's the national model that we brought to the district. In the last few years, we've been able to prove that parents and teachers working together, teachers actually visiting parents in their homes, sitting down, asking the question, what are your hopes and your dreams for your child for the school year, and setting goals accordingly. In 3 years, we've seen academic gains, we've seen better behavior management, and this year we're talking with parents also about attendance so we can push back on that issue.
You know, and that's what I wanted to strike to, because so many times when we talk about the success or the failure of our schools and we look at test scores and say, well, are things going very well? You get people who will point, well, it's the teachers. We've got to hold the teachers to a higher standard. And then you have people say, well, it's parents. If the parents would just be more engaged and more involved with their kids. So how would you, I guess, address that criticism or address some of those conversations about the partnership between teachers and parents and the importance of it?
Yeah, and I think it has to be a partnership. It cannot be just one or the other. The teacher and the parent has to work together. The students have to see that they're on the same page. You know, if I, as a teacher, have certain expectations, the parent also has to have those same expectations.
How do you engage those parents, though, who maybe
Oh,
say,
through
"Oh, I'm not
conversation.
there."
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
definitely
think
through
there has to
conversation.
be different strategies. I
Yes.
think we have to be more creative and open, starting with the premise that parents do care about their children. We hear people starting from a different place all the time, but we have to realize we bust children, not parents, and we don't bust children adequately. We're in a motor city where a lot of parents still don't have a motor vehicle, and many kids don't go to school in their neighborhoods anymore. That's just a thing of the past. And so when we think about those type of impediments, we have to think about things that we use in everyday business world. Why not set up conference calls to create a winning position for parents to be able to call in? We have parents that are working a couple different jobs who have children in multiple schools across multiple systems, and so, but we continue to do things the way we always did them when I was in school, in a neighborhood school, and my mother could walk 2 blocks.
Are we asking too much of teachers? Are we asking them to take on too much in the classroom, not only the academics, but maybe social issues that they've got to deal with kids that are coming from different backgrounds?
We're asking a lot of teachers, and I think what we've done in the negotiations, something that we've done different, we have asked the district to partner with us to create what we call community schools, and not just after school program. We're talking about a complete wraparound services of where the school is the hub of the neighborhood. We have to change how we do business. You know, we have to look at that neighborhood and see what that neighborhood, what the needs are in that neighborhood, and we have to bring those things into the school.
Absolutely.
You know, and that means having school open to 8 o'clock at night, then we have to do that. But I think when you create those hubs, I think it will bring more parents in, and parents have to feel that they can come into a school. They have to feel welcome.
And
yes.
that's one of the things that we lift up as a parent organization early on in the school year, developing a relationship with your child's teacher, giving them whatever intel you have that's going to make them more effective at teaching them, but also understanding what that teacher is expecting. So I know my daughter Helena has to read 30 minutes every night. That's something I control as a parent. I think the other early evidence of how community schools actually work, and there are lots of models across the country, but the work that we did in the parent resource centers, we were able to bring in a myriad of partners who were able to help provide those wraparound support services and push back on things that teachers had been having to deal with, whether it is you know, grandparents raising grandchildren, having to figure out how to resource that family. We were able to strike up a partnership with Gleaners Food Bank and move hundreds of thousands of pounds of food into homes. And so those are the kinds of early examples of how we know that model can work. It's about getting to it.
You know, before we leave this conversation, Avi, I have to ask you, last year, Detroit teachers made national news because of the sick-outs and exposing, I think, a lot of the problems with the buildings with DPS. I think a lot of parents are going to be wondering, what can they expect this year? Do you anticipate any kind of action like that again?
I don't anticipate it, but I think what people need to understand is that teachers are their children's advocates. We're advocates for those children. Those are our kids. When they come to school, we feel like they're our children, and you know, we couldn't continue to allow what was happening in the schools to, you know, like cover it up. It's just like when you have company come over and you fix up the house and everything and make it look good, and we were doing that every day for our students. But you know, it got to a point where you couldn't continue to put the Band-Aid on it. You know, things were falling apart.
But
and
students
so,
got the shortest end of that stick, because we had parents showing up with their kids, very concerned, not necessarily having a plan A or B, not having the kind of job where they can just call in.
And there's the tough balance there.
Right, and there is a balance.
And you had students who said, I had a test to take this week, and I don't know what's going to happen. I'm supposed to graduate this year. And so students, and being able to lift up those stories around how this was impacting children, parents are champions for children, and parents were frustrated, obviously conflicted, because they support their teachers, but at the same time, they're champions for their children. And this was about how this was hurting their children.
Yeah, but I also have to push back on that, because a lot of parents supported the teachers. I mean, who wants their child in a school where there's rats and roaches? Who wants their child in a school where the ceiling tiles are falling in? So I think a lot of parents did not realize some of the things that were going on in the school, because we covered them up. And I think once the parents understood what was going on, you know, and no teacher wants to harm a child, but how far are you supposed to, how long are you supposed to sit back and allow these things to happen before you speak up for your students?
And the other side of that is a lot of young people will not be able to march in that line because they won't qualify for jobs to be teachers. And so don't get me wrong, I'm all for unions. I'm a Detroit girl, support all of that. But teachers, those jobs our kids won't qualify for because they're not getting the education that they're entitled to. It's adults' job to fix this.
All right, Sharlonda Buckman from the Detroit Parent Network. I encourage people to go ahead and check out your website, programs to help parents become advocates for their students. Ivy Bailey from the Detroit Federation of Teachers. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, as part of its year-long project, the Detroit Journalism Cooperative received funding from the Knight Foundation to conduct a survey on race relations and racial attitudes. And the poll of 600 Michigan residents also asked about education-related issues. And here's a look at the results. Education and crime are the top concerns of the Metro Detroiters who were surveyed by Lansing-based Epic MRA. 23% ranked both of these issues as the most important in the region. There was no marked difference between African Americans and whites. All agreed education and crime concern them the most. 12% of respondents said they worried more about the state of the economy and the outlook for jobs. Answers were split along racial lines when it came to a question about local schools. Nearly 60% of whites were satisfied with the quality of their local schools, compared to only about 30% of African Americans who were pleased with their neighborhood schools. Almost 70% of blacks expressed dissatisfaction with the schools in their communities. Only a small number were undecided. Just under 40% of whites weren't happy with their local schools. When it came to Detroit public schools, the majority of those polled rated the district as fair to poor. Less than 20% felt that the district schools are excellent or good. Margin of error of plus or minus 4%, and those surveyed lived in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties.